The bucket of water felt like liquid ice against Penelope's raw, reddened hands as she plunged the bristle brush into it one more time. The morning cold of December 1882, seeping through the wooden floorboards of the Silver Dollar Saloon in White Oaks, New Mexico territory. She had been scrubbing since 4 in the morning, and now, as weak winter sunlight filtered through the grimy windows, her knees ached something fierce against the hard planks, her threadbare dress doing little to protect her from the frigid temperatures that had settled over the mining town like a bitter shroud. The water in her bucket had a thin layer of ice forming on top every few minutes, which she had to break with the brush before continuing her work, her breath coming out in visible puffs as she labored in the unheated saloon. The floor was filthy from the previous night's revelry, tracked with mud and tobacco juice and worse things she tried not to think about too hard. Penelope Harris had been working at the Silver Dollar for 3 months now, ever since her father had died in a mining accident and left her with nothing but debts, and a reputation tarnished by his drinking. At 19 years old, she had few options in a town where respectable work for a woman was scarce, and the saloon owner, a cruel man named Victor Kane, had offered her a job scrubbing floors for pennies while making it clear what other services he expected her to eventually provide. She had resisted so far, keeping her head down and her mouth shut, but she knew her situation was precarious at best. Her fingers had gone numb 20 minutes ago, which was almost a blessing because at least she could not feel the sting of the lye soap anymore. The dress she wore had been her mother's before consumption had taken her 5 years back, and it was worn so thin in places that it might as well have been cheesecloth. Penelope had no coat, no proper shoes, only the cracked leather boots that had belonged to her father and were 2 sizes too large, stuffed with newspaper to make them fit. She was hungry, always hungry these days, living on the scraps the cook sometimes snuck to her when Kane was not looking. The front door of the saloon swung open, letting in a blast of cold air that made Penelope gasp. She looked up, expecting to see Kane coming to criticize her work, but instead found herself looking at a man she had never seen before. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders covered by a heavy sheepskin coat that looked warm enough to sleep in. His hat was pulled low, but she could see dark hair curling at his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He had the weathered look of a man who spent his days outdoors, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun across long distances. "We are not open yet," Penelope said quietly, her voice hoarse from disuse. She spoke to so few people these days that sometimes she wondered if she would forget how altogether. The man stepped inside and closed the door behind him, his boots tracking fresh snow onto the floor she had just cleaned. She bit back a sigh. He looked around the dim interior of the saloon with an assessing gaze, his eyes adjusting to the low light. When his gaze fell on her, kneeling there in her thin dress with her hands red and raw, something shifted in his expression. "I am looking for Victor Kane," he said. His voice was deep and carried easily across the empty room. "I heard he might be looking to sell this place." Penelope sat back on her heels, surprised. "I do not know anything about that. Mr. Kane is still sleeping. He does not come down until noon most days." The man walked closer, his steps deliberate and measured. Now that he was nearer, Penelope could see that his eyes were a striking gray-green color, like sage after a rain. He was perhaps 25 or 26, she guessed, with the kind of capable look that suggested he was not a man to be trifled with. There was a gun on his hip, worn with the ease of long familiarity, but something about his bearing suggested he was not a gunslinger or an outlaw. He had an honest face if such a thing could be judged on sight alone. "That water is frozen," he observed, looking at her bucket. "Yes, sir, it gets that way." "How long have you been working in it?" Penelope did not understand why this stranger was asking her questions, but something in his tone made her answer honestly. "Since before dawn. I have to finish the floors before the saloon opens, or Mr. Kane docks my pay." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He has you scrubbing floors in frozen water. In December, without even a fire lit. The fire costs money. Mr. Kane says it would be wasteful to light it just for cleaning." Penelope heard how pathetic the words sounded as she spoke them, and she felt her cheeks flush with shame despite the cold. She did not know why she cared what this stranger thought, but she found herself wishing she looked less bedraggled, less desperate. The man was silent for a long moment, studying her with those keen eyes. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a box of matches. Before Penelope could say anything, he walked over to the pot-bellied stove in the corner and began building a fire from the stack of wood beside it. "You do not have to do that," Penelope said, alarmed. "Mr. Kane will be angry." "Let him be angry," the man replied calmly, striking a match and touching it to the kindling. "No woman should be working in conditions like this. No person should." The fire caught and began to crackle, and within minutes Penelope could feel the first tentative waves of warmth reaching across the room. It was such a relief that she nearly cried, though she held the tears back through sheer force of will. She had learned not to cry in front of people. It only made them uncomfortable, or worse, gave them ideas about taking advantage of her vulnerability. The man returned to where she knelt and looked down at her hands. Without asking permission, he took one of them in his own much larger hand, examining her reddened, chapped fingers with a frown. His hands were warm, calloused but gentle, and Penelope felt heat rush through her that had nothing to do with the fire he had just lit. "These need tending," he said. "Do you have salve? Bandages?" "No, sir, I am fine. I have worked through worse." It was not quite true, but she did not want his pity. "What is your name?" "Penelope Harris, sir." "My name is Graham Brennan." "I am not a sir, just a man who works for a living same as anyone. I run cattle mostly, though I have been looking to invest in property." He released her hand, but his eyes remained serious. "How much does Kane pay you for this work?" Penelope hesitated. The amount was so pitiful that she was embarrassed to say it aloud. $2 a week, and sometimes meals if the cook has extra." Graham's expression darkened. $2 a week to scrub floors in frozen water before dawn. That is not work. That is cruelty. "It is all I could find," Penelope said defensively. "My father died owing money to half the businesses in town. No one else would hire me. At least this keeps a roof over my head." That was not entirely true either. She slept in a storage closet barely large enough to lie down in, with only a thin blanket to keep her warm, but it was technically a roof. Graham looked around the saloon again, and Penelope could see him taking in every detail. The scarred bar, the rickety tables and chairs, the paintings of dubious taste on the walls. The place had potential, she supposed, if someone cared enough to fix it up. But Kane had let it deteriorate over the years, spending his profits on gambling and worse pursuits. "I am going to wait for Kane," Graham said finally. "But you should stop scrubbing that floor. Come sit by the fire and warm yourself." "I cannot. If the work is not done, I will deal with Kane. Come on now, you look half frozen to death." There was a quality of command in his voice that made it difficult to refuse. Penelope found herself getting stiffly to her feet, her knees protesting after so many hours kneeling on the hard floor. She swayed slightly, lightheaded from hunger and cold, and Graham's hand shot out to steady her, gripping her elbow firmly. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday evening. The cook gave me some bread." Graham muttered something under his breath that Penelope did not quite catch, though she thought it might have been a curse. He guided her over to a chair near the fire and made her sit, then disappeared briefly out the front door. When he returned, he was carrying saddlebags which he set on a nearby table. From them he produced a cloth-wrapped bundle which, when opened, revealed biscuits and dried beef. "Eat," he said, placing the food in front of her. Penelope's stomach growled audibly at the sight, but she shook her head. "I cannot take your food. You can and you will. I have plenty more, and you look like you have not had a proper meal in weeks." When she still hesitated, his voice softened. "Please, it would ease my mind to see you eat something." The kindness in his tone nearly undid her. Penelope picked up one of the biscuits with trembling hands and bit into it. It was good, still relatively fresh, with butter and salt that made it the best thing she had tasted in months. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but hunger won out and she devoured the biscuit in less than a minute before starting on another. Graham watched her with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and anger, though she sensed the anger was not directed at her. He pulled up another chair and sat down, close enough to the fire that the warmth could reach them both. Now that she was not working, Penelope became aware of how cold she really was, how deeply the chill had penetrated. She shivered despite the fire, her teeth chattering. Without a word, Graham stood and removed his sheepskin coat, draping it over her shoulders before she could protest. It was heavy and warm and smelled of leather and horses and something else, something clean and masculine that made her feel strangely safe. She pulled it tighter around herself, too grateful to refuse this time. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have nothing to thank me for. Common decency is not something that deserves praise." He settled back in his chair, watching the fire. "How did you end up working for Cain?" And so Penelope found herself telling him her story, the words coming easier than they had in months. She told him about her father, a good man who had turned to drink after her mother died, who had tried to drown his grief in whiskey and poker games. She told him about the mining accident, how a shaft had collapsed and taken her father and 3 other men. She told him about the debts, how creditors had come and taken everything of value from their small cabin on the edge of town, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back. "I tried to find respectable work," she said, staring at her hands. "I asked at the general store, the hotel, even the laundry, but my father's reputation followed me and no one wanted to take a chance on me. They said I would probably steal or that I would cause trouble. Cain was the only one who offered me work, and even then it was work no one else wanted to do." "What about family? Do you have anyone who could help?" Penelope shook her head. "My mother was an only child and her parents died before I was born. My father had a brother back in Missouri, but they had not spoken in years. I would not know how to find him even if I wanted to." Graham was quiet for a long moment, and Penelope wondered if she had said too much, revealed herself to be too pathetic for even his casual kindness. But when he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful rather than pitying. "I came to White Oaks to look at business opportunities," he said. "I have been running cattle down in the southern part of the territory, but I am looking to settle somewhere more permanent. I have some money saved, enough to make an investment in the right property. The Silver Dollar is one of the places I am considering, though I admit it needs work." "Are you thinking to run a saloon?" Penelope asked, surprised. He did not seem the type. "Maybe. Or maybe I would turn it into something else. A hotel, perhaps, or a restaurant. This town is growing with the mines, and there is money to be made if a man is smart about it." He looked at her directly, and there was something in his gaze that made her heart skip. "But if I were to buy this place, I would need staff, people I could trust to help me run it properly." Penelope understood what he was suggesting, but she hardly dared to hope. I do not have any experience except scrubbing floors. Experience can be learned, character cannot. Graham leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I can see you are a hard worker, Penelope. Anyone who would scrub floors in frozen water just to keep a roof over her head has the kind of determination I respect. If I buy this saloon, I would need someone to help manage it. Someone to handle the books, order supplies, make sure things run smoothly. That is warmer work than scrubbing floors, and it pays a whole lot better than $2 a week. You do not even know me, Penelope said, though her heart was pounding with a hope she had thought long dead. Why would you make an offer like that to a stranger? Maybe because I recognize someone who has had a hard run of luck, but has not let it break her spirit. Maybe because I think everyone deserves a chance to prove what they can do. He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and more approachable. Or maybe I am just a foolish cowboy who lets his heart make decisions his head ought to think twice about. Before Penelope could respond, she heard heavy footsteps on the stairs that led up to the rooms above the saloon. Victor Kane was descending, his tread uneven and irritable. He was a large man, gone to fat in middle age, with a florid face and mean little eyes that always seemed to be calculating how to extract maximum profit from minimum expense. When he reached the bottom of the stairs and saw Penelope sitting by the fire instead of scrubbing floors, his face turned an ugly shade of red. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" he roared. "Get back to work, girl. That floor is not going to clean itself, and you are burning my wood." Penelope jumped to her feet, Graham's coat falling from her shoulders, but before she could move toward her bucket, Graham stood as well. He was several inches taller than Kane and considerably more fit, and when he placed himself between Penelope and the angry saloon owner, there was something protective and almost dangerous in his posture. "You must be Victor Kane," Graham said, his voice level and calm. "I am Graham Brennan. I sent word last week that I wanted to discuss purchasing this property." Kane's anger faltered slightly as he registered Graham's words, replaced by a calculating gleam in his eye. "Brennan, yes, you are the cattleman. I got your message." He looked past Graham at Penelope, his expression hardening again. "But that does not explain why my employee is sitting by the fire instead of doing her job." "Your employee was scrubbing floors in frozen water in an unheated room," Graham said, and there was steel beneath the calm of his voice now. "That is not reasonable working conditions for anyone. I took the liberty of lighting a fire so we could discuss business in comfort." "The girl is paid to work, not to be comfortable," Kane said dismissively. "She knows the terms of her employment. $2 a week to work in conditions that would make a mule balky. That is not employment. That is exploitation." Kane's eyes narrowed. "If she does not like the terms, she is free to find work elsewhere. No one is forcing her to stay." "We both know that is not true. You hired her because she was desperate and had nowhere else to go, and you have been taking advantage of that desperation ever since." Graham's voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it now that made Kane take an involuntary step backward. "But we are not here to argue about labor practices. You want to sell this saloon. I am interested in buying it. Let us talk numbers." The negotiations that followed were tense but brief. Graham had clearly done his research, because he knew exactly what the silver dollar was worth, down to the last stick of furniture. Kane tried to inflate the price, citing the saloon's location and reputation, but Graham countered every argument with facts about needed repairs, declining patronage, and the overall state of the property. Penelope listened in amazement as Graham negotiated with the skill of a seasoned businessman, never raising his voice but never giving an inch unless it was strategic. In the end, They agreed on a price that seemed to satisfy both men, though Kane looked less pleased than Graham. They would finalize the sale with the land office and a lawyer within the week, pending inspection of the deed and other legal matters. Kane would be out by the end of the month, taking his personal belongings and nothing more. What about current staff? Graham asked as they were concluding their discussion. Are any of them under contract? Just the girl, Kane said with a dismissive wave toward Penelope. But you are welcome to her if you want her. She is a decent enough worker when she actually works. Graham's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. I will be keeping Miss Harris on, yes, at proper wages and in proper working conditions. Is there anyone else? The cook comes in during evening hours, but he works for himself more than for me. The bartender left last month, and I've been doing that work myself. There are a couple of girls who work the upstairs rooms, but they are independent contractors, if you take my meaning. I will not be continuing that kind of business, Graham said firmly. The girls will need to find other arrangements. Kane shrugged, clearly unconcerned. Suit yourself. You are the one buying the place. After Kane left to get dressed and attend to his own business, Graham turned back to Penelope, who was still standing by the fire, trying to process everything that had just happened. It felt like a dream, the kind that would dissolve into disappointment when she woke up cold and hungry in her storage closet. Is this real? She asked quietly. As real as anything in this world, Graham replied. He picked up his coat from where it had fallen and draped it around her shoulders again. I meant what I said, Penelope. I will need help running this place, and I think you would be good at it. If you are willing, I would like to offer you a proper job. 3 meals a day, a real room to live in, and wages we can negotiate based on the work you will be doing. What do you say? Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes despite her best efforts to contain them. Why are you doing this? You do not owe me anything. We only just met. Graham was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, there was something in his voice that suggested he was being more honest than he was entirely comfortable with. My mother died when I was young, and my father raised me and my sisters on his own. It was hard, especially for the girls. I saw how the world treats women who do not have protection, who do not have resources. I saw my sisters struggle with things they should never have had to face alone. He met her eyes steadily. When I see someone in a situation like yours, I remember them. I remember thinking that if only someone had given them a chance, things might have been different. So maybe I am doing this because I wish someone had done it for them. Does that make sense? Yes, Penelope whispered. That makes perfect sense. So you will work for me. Help me turn this place into something better than what it is. Yes. Yes, I will, and thank you so much. Graham smiled again, that transformative smile that made him look almost boyish despite his weathered features. Good. That is settled then. Now, I am going to go attend to some business at the land office and speak with a lawyer about the sale. While I am gone, I want you to stop working. Take the day for yourself. Rest, warm up, eat something. There is more food in my saddlebags. Tomorrow we can start planning what needs to be done here. But Mr. Kane will be too busy counting his money and planning his departure to bother you. And if he does, you tell him you are working for me now and he can take any complaints directly to me. Graham picked up his saddlebags and headed for the door, then paused and looked back. I am staying at the hotel up the street if you need anything. The Lincoln House, I think it is called. Do not hesitate to come find me if there is any trouble. After he left, Penelope stood by the fire for a long time, his coat still wrapped around her shoulders, trying to convince herself that what had just happened was real. The warmth from the stove and from his coat was seeping into her bones, and with it came an unfamiliar feeling that it took her several minutes to identify. It was hope, The next week passed in a blur of activity and change that left Penelope's head spinning. Graham completed the purchase of the silver dollar with an efficiency that spoke of experience in such matters, and Victor Kane departed White Oaks with barely a backward glance, leaving behind only debris and bad memories. The two women who had been working the upstairs rooms moved on without much fuss, and Graham immediately set about making changes to the property. He hired carpenters to repair the sagging porch and replace broken windows. He had the entire building cleaned from top to bottom, bringing in workers when the job proved too big for one person. He ordered new furniture from a supplier in Las Cruces, good solid pieces that would withstand heavy use. He brought in a painter to refresh the walls, covering the garish colors Kane had favored with more subdued tones of cream and soft green. Through it all, Penelope worked alongside him, discovering she had a talent for organization she had never known existed. Graham had been true to his word about giving her warmer work. Instead of scrubbing floors, she found herself taking inventory, ordering supplies, keeping books, and helping Graham plan the transformation of the silver dollar from a rough saloon into what he envisioned as a respectable hotel and restaurant. He had given her a room on the second floor, a real room with a bed and a washstand and a window that looked out on the main street of White Oaks. After months of sleeping in a closet, it felt like unimaginable luxury. He had also advanced her money to buy proper clothes and shoes, insisting it was a business expense since she would be dealing with suppliers and customers. The dresses she bought were simple but well made, warmer than anything she had owned in years, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Graham himself was a puzzle that Penelope found herself wanting to solve. He worked harder than any man she had ever known, often laboring alongside the carpenters and painters rather than just supervising. He was fair with everyone who worked for him, paying good wages and treating even the lowliest laborer with respect. He was patient when teaching Penelope new skills, never making her feel stupid when she made mistakes, always encouraging her to try again. But there were moments when she would catch him staring out a window with a distant look in his eyes, as if he was remembering something far away. He rarely spoke about his past beyond the brief mention of his mother and sisters, and she sensed there were depths to him that he kept carefully guarded. She wanted to know more, wanted to understand what had shaped him into the kind of man who would rescue a desperate woman scrubbing floors and give her a chance at a better life. It was 2 weeks after the sale when they finally had a chance to talk properly again. The work had reached a point where they could pause for breath, and Graham suggested they walk through town to look at how other businesses operated. It was a clear January day, cold but bright, and Penelope wore her new coat and gloves with a sense of gratitude that still felt fresh and overwhelming. They stopped first at the general store, where Graham made inquiries about how they handled their supply orders and what products were most popular. Penelope took notes, her handwriting improving with practice. Then they visited the hotel where Graham had stayed when he first arrived, asking questions about room rates and occupancy. The owner, a friendly woman named Mrs. Chen who had come west with her husband to open a laundry and expand it into lodging, gave them advice about what travelers most wanted. "Clean sheets," she said firmly. "Clean sheets, good food, and a quiet night's sleep. You give them that, and they will come back and tell their friends." After they left the hotel, Graham suggested they get lunch at a small restaurant near the edge of town. It was run by a Mexican family and served food that made Penelope's mouth water, spicy and rich, and unlike anything she had ever tasted. Over plates of enchiladas and beans, Graham finally began to talk about himself in more detail. "I grew up in Texas," he said, leaning back in his chair with a cup of coffee warming his hands. "My father had a small ranch, nothing grand, but enough to support a family. He worked himself nearly to death trying to make it succeed, and in the end it killed him. I was 18 when he died." "My sisters were younger." "How much younger?" Penelope asked softly. "Emma was 16, Sarah was 14, and little Grace was only 10, too young to be without parents, too young to face the world alone." His eyes grew distant with memory. "I tried to keep the ranch going, but I was young and did not know what I was doing. We lost it within a year. I managed to get my sisters placed with families who would take them in, good families who promised to treat them well. Then I took what little money was left and started working cattle for other men, learning the business from the ground up. You still see your sisters. Emma married a farmer in East Texas and has 3 children now. Sarah works as a teacher in Austin. Grace is 17 now, living with a family in San Antonio and learning to be a seamstress." He smiled slightly. "They are all doing well, which is more than I could have hoped for during those dark days after Father died. But I always felt I had failed them somehow, that if I had been smarter or worked harder, I could have kept us together." "You were just a boy yourself," Penelope said. "You did the best you could. Maybe, but it taught me something important. It taught me that in this world, you have to take care of the people who depend on you, and you have to plan for the future because luck can turn on a penny." He looked at her directly, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch. "That is why I saved my money, instead of spending it on whiskey and cards like so many cowboys do. That is why I am investing in property and businesses, instead of just drifting from one ranch to another. I want to build something that will last, something that cannot be taken away by one season of bad weather or a run of ill fortune." "That is admirable," Penelope said quietly. "What about you?" Graham asked. "You mentioned your father turned to drink after your mother died. What was he like before?" Penelope had to think about that, reaching back into memories that were growing hazier with time. "He was good, kind. He used to sing to my mother these old songs from when he was young. He worked in the mines, but he always came home to us. He always made sure we had what we needed. When my mother died, it was like something broke inside him. He could not find his way back to being the man he had been before." "Grief can do that to a person," Graham said. "It can twist you up inside until you do not recognize yourself anymore." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, finishing their meal. Penelope found herself studying Graham's face, noting the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at his temples, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned despite whatever hardships he had faced. He was handsome, she realized, though that was not what drew her to him. It was the steadiness of him, the sense that he was a man who kept his word and followed through on his commitments. In a world that had proven treacherous and unpredictable, that quality was more attractive than any physical feature. As if feeling her gaze, Graham looked up and met her eyes. For a moment, something passed between them, a connection that was deeper than employer and employee, more significant than simple kindness between strangers. Then Graham cleared his throat and looked away, and the moment passed, leaving Penelope with a fluttering sensation in her chest that she did not quite know how to name. Over the following weeks, the silver dollar's transformation continued. Graham officially reopened it under a new name, the Brennan Hotel and Restaurant, with a small celebration that drew half the town. The main floor had been converted into a dining room with a small bar that served beer and wine but not hard liquor, a decision that surprised many, but proved popular with families and respectable travelers. The upstairs rooms had been refurbished into clean, comfortable lodgings that quickly became known as the best accommodation in White Oaks. Penelope managed much of the day-to-day operations, and she discovered she was good at it. She had a head for numbers and a knack for dealing with difficult customers, able to soothe ruffled feathers and solve problems before they escalated. Graham handled the bigger picture, managing relationships with suppliers and planning expansions, but he increasingly relied on Penelope's judgment and advice. They worked together with an ease that felt natural, complementing each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses. The staff grew slowly. They hired a new cook, a former trail cook named Samuel who could turn simple ingredients into memorable meals. They brought on 2 young women to help with cleaning and serving, sisters named Mary and Jane who were grateful for honest work. They hired a man named Thomas to handle maintenance and heavy lifting. Graham treated all of them fairly, paying good wages and creating an atmosphere that felt more like a family business than a typical frontier establishment. As spring arrived and the snow melted from the mountains, revealing the greening valleys beyond, Penelope realized she was happy. It was a strange feeling after so many months of mere survival. She had meaningful work, a comfortable place to live, enough to eat, and people who treated her with respect. But there was something else too, something that grew stronger every time she and Graham worked side by side. Every time their hands brushed accidentally while reviewing the books, every time she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, she was falling in love with him. The realization came one evening in late March, as she stood in the kitchen helping Samuel prepare for the dinner service. Graham had come in from a trip to Lincoln to meet with suppliers, dusty from the road but energized by the success of his negotiations. He had found her in the kitchen and launched immediately into a description of his trip, his enthusiasm infectious as he described the new dishware he had ordered, and the connection he had made with a rancher who could supply them with quality beef at reasonable prices. Watching him gesture animatedly, his face alight with passion for the business they were building together, Penelope felt her heart swell with an emotion so powerful it nearly took her breath away. She loved him. She loved his integrity, his kindness, his vision, his strength. She loved the way he treated everyone with dignity, the way he kept his promises, the way he had given her a chance when no one else would. She loved the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She loved everything about him, but she said nothing. How could she? He was her employer, her benefactor, the man who had rescued her from scrubbing floors in frozen water. The imbalance between them was too great. If she spoke of her feelings and he did not return them, she would lose everything she had gained. It was too risky, too dangerous. So she kept her feelings locked away, a secret treasure she could examine only in the privacy of her own heart. Graham, for his part, seemed oblivious to her inner turmoil. He continued to treat her with the same friendly respect he always had, professional but warm, never crossing any lines that might suggest he saw her as anything other than a valued colleague. Penelope told herself she was content with that. It was enough to be near him, to work with him, to see him every day. It had to be enough, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. It was a Saturday evening in early April and the restaurant was full. White Oaks was experiencing a surge of prosperity as the mines continued to produce, and people had money to spend on good food and entertainment. Penelope was managing the dining room, seating guests and taking orders and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Graham was behind the bar, serving drinks and chatting with customers. It was the kind of busy evening that was exhausting but satisfying, proof that their hard work was paying off. Among the customers that evening were two men Penelope recognized as troublemakers. They were miners, rough men who had money in their pockets and too much free time on their hands. They had been drinking before they arrived, and they grew louder and more obnoxious as the evening progressed. Penelope kept an eye on them, ready to intervene if necessary, but hoping they would finish their meal and leave without incident. She should have known better. It started when one of the men, a large brute named Jack Connolly, grabbed Mary's arm as she passed with a tray of dishes. Mary tried to pull away, but Connolly held on, making crude suggestions about what she could do to earn a bigger tip. Penelope saw it happen and moved quickly, crossing the room to intervene before the situation escalated. "Let her go," Penelope said firmly, placing herself between Mary and Connolly. "We do not allow that kind of behavior here." Connolly looked up at her with bleary, mean eyes. "And who are you to tell me what to do? Just a serving girl yourself, from what I hear, though I heard other things too. Heard you used to work for Kane, doing whatever he told you to do." The implication was clear and ugly, and Penelope felt her face flush with anger and shame. "You heard wrong. I worked cleaning floors for Mr. Kane, nothing more. And I work as manager here now, which gives me the authority to ask you to leave if you cannot behave respectfully." "Manager," Connolly sneered. "Fancy title for a whore." The word hung in the air, and the surrounding tables fell silent. Penelope felt her throat tighten, felt the weight of everyone's stares. Before she could formulate a response, Graham was there, having vaulted over the bar with a speed that surprised everyone. He grabbed Connolly by the front of his shirt and hauled him to his feet with such force that the man's chair toppled backward. "Apologize," Graham said, his voice low and dangerous. "Right now." Connolly tried to bluster, but there was something in Graham's eyes that gave him pause. Graham was not a small man, and right now he looked capable of considerable violence. "I did not mean nothing by it," Connolly muttered, "just having a bit of fun. Apologize to Miss Harris, now." "Sorry," Connolly mumbled, not meeting Penelope's eyes, "not good enough." Graham's grip tightened. "Look at her and apologize properly, or I will throw you into the street and you will never set foot in this establishment again." Connolly finally met Penelope's gaze, and there was genuine fear in his eyes now. "I apologize, Miss Harris. I spoke out of turn." Graham released him with a slight push that sent him stumbling. "You and your friend are done here. Pay your bill and leave." The two men threw some money on the table and left quickly, and the normal hum of conversation gradually resumed. Graham turned to Penelope, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," Penelope said, though her voice shook slightly. "Thank you for intervening. You should not have to deal with men like that. If anyone ever speaks to you that way again, you come get me immediately. Understand?" The protectiveness in his tone made something warm bloom in Penelope's chest. "I understand." Later that evening, after the last customers had left and the staff had cleaned up and gone home, Penelope and Graham sat together in the dining room going over the day's receipts. It was a nightly ritual they had developed, a quiet time to review how the day had gone and plan for tomorrow. Usually they talked about business matters, but tonight Graham seemed distracted. "I am sorry about what happened earlier," he said abruptly. "Men like Connolly make me see red. The way they think they can say anything to a woman, do anything, just because they have money in their pockets. You have nothing to apologize for. You defended my honor." Penelope hesitated, then added, "Not many men would do that. Any decent man would." "In my experience, decent men are rarer than you might think." She set down her pencil and looked at him directly. "Graham, I want to thank you, not just for tonight, but for everything. for giving me this job, for treating me with respect, for seeing me as more than just a desperate woman scrubbing floors. You changed my life." Graham shifted uncomfortably, as if praise made him uneasy. "You changed your own life. I just gave you an opportunity. You are the one who made the most of it. But you were the one who saw potential in me when no one else did. That matters more than you know." Penelope took a breath, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff about to jump. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really do it? The real reason. Not the story about your sisters, though I believe that is part of it. But there is something else, is there not? Something you have not told me." Graham was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming absently on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful, as if he was choosing each word with great deliberation. "When I first walked into the Silver Dollar that morning and saw you kneeling there in that thin dress, scrubbing floors in frozen water, something happened that I did not expect. I looked at you and I saw strength. I saw someone who had been beaten down by circumstances but had not given up, who was enduring terrible conditions but was still fighting to survive. And I thought, that is someone worth knowing. That is someone I want in my life." Penelope's heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I did not just give you a job out of charity or because you reminded me of my sisters. I gave you a job because from the moment I saw you, I was drawn to you in a way I could not explain and did not entirely want to acknowledge." He met her eyes, and there was vulnerability in his gaze now, an openness that made her breath catch. "These past few months working with you have been the best of my life. You are smart and capable and brave, and every day I find myself wanting to know you better, wanting to be near you. I have been trying to keep things professional, trying not to cross any lines because you work for me, and I did not want you to feel obligated or uncomfortable. But after what happened tonight, after seeing that fool insult you, I realized that life is too short to keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" Penelope whispered. "I feel like I am falling in love with you." "No, that is not right. I have already fallen." "I love you, Penelope Harris. I have for weeks now, maybe longer. And I know this is not the right way to say it, and the timing is terrible, but I cannot keep it inside anymore." Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were different from the bitter tears of desperation she had cried in the past. These were tears of joy, of relief, of dreams she had not dared to acknowledge suddenly becoming real. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I have been so afraid to say it because I thought you could never see me as anything more than a charity case, someone you rescued out of pity. But I love you, Graham. I love you so much." Graham stood and moved around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. For a moment, they just held each other, and Penelope felt the last of her protective walls crumble. He was warm and solid and real, and he was hers. Then he tipped her chin up and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper, with a passion that made her dizzy. She kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past months, pouring everything she felt into that single perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Graham rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly the way you deserve. And then, if you will have me, I want to marry you." "Are you proposing?" Penelope asked, half laughing, half crying. "Not yet. Not until I have a ring and can do it properly. But I am telling you my intentions, so there is no doubt about where this is going." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I want to build a life with you, Penelope. I want us to be partners in every sense of the word. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to face whatever comes with you at my side. Does that sound good to you?" "That sounds like everything I have ever wanted," Penelope said. The weeks that followed were the happiest Penelope had ever known. True to his word, Graham courted her properly, despite the fact that they lived under the same roof and worked together every day. He took her on walks through the countryside surrounding White Oaks, showing her the land he was considering purchasing for a ranch. He brought her small gifts, nothing extravagant but thoughtful, things that showed he paid attention to what she liked. He held her hand and kissed her goodnight at her bedroom door, always respectful, always mindful of her reputation. The whole town soon knew they were courting, and while there was some gossip, most of it was positive. People liked Graham, respected the way he did business, and many remarked that Penelope was a lucky woman to have caught his eye. Mrs. Chen from the hotel stopped by one day to congratulate them, bringing a beautiful embroidered handkerchief as a gift. "You two are good together," she said, smiling. "I could see it from the first time you came to ask me questions about the hotel business. The way he looked at you, the way you looked at him, like you were already a team." "It feels that way," Penelope agreed. "Like we were meant to find each other." In May, Graham took her on a trip to Lincoln, the county seat, ostensibly to meet with suppliers but really to show her the wider world beyond White Oaks. They stayed in separate rooms at a respectable hotel, but they spent their days together, exploring the town and talking about their plans for the future. Graham wanted to expand the business, perhaps open another hotel in a different town. He wanted to buy land and raise cattle as well, diversifying their investments. And he wanted a family, children to carry on what they were building. "How many children do you want?" Penelope asked as they sat together on a bench outside the courthouse, watching people go about their daily business. "As many as the Lord sees fit to give us," Graham replied. "But at least 2 or 3 so they have siblings to lean on. What about you?" "I always wanted a big family. When I was growing up, I was lonely being an only child. I used to imagine having brothers and sisters to play with." "Then we will have a big family," Graham said, taking her hand. "A house full of noise and laughter and love." It was on that trip that Graham finally proposed properly. He took her to a jewelry store in Lincoln and let her help choose the ring, a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond. Then he led her to a quiet spot by the river that ran through town, got down on one knee, and asked her to be his wife. "Penelope Harris, you are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in this life and build a future with me?" "Yes," Penelope said, not even trying to hold back her tears now. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he stood and kissed her, and Penelope felt like her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it all. 6 months ago, she had been scrubbing floors in frozen water, alone and desperate and hopeless. Now she was engaged to the man she loved, with a future stretching before her full of promise and possibility. The transformation was so complete that it sometimes felt like it had happened to someone else, like she was living in a dream from which she would eventually wake. But it was real. Graham was real, solid and constant in a way that made her trust in tomorrow. The ring on her finger was real, cool and weighty and beautiful. The love she felt was real, growing stronger every day. This was her life now, and she would never take it for granted. They married in June, just as summer was settling over the high desert of New Mexico territory. It was a simple ceremony held in the dining room of the Brennan Hotel and Restaurant, which had become the heart of their community. Mrs. Chen helped Penelope sew a dress of pale blue cotton, and Mary and Jane decorated the room with wildflowers picked from the surrounding hills. Samuel prepared a feast, and it seemed like half of White Oaks turned out to celebrate. Graham wore a new suit for the occasion, and when Penelope saw him standing at the front of the room waiting for her, so handsome and nervous and full of hope, she knew she was making the right choice. The local minister performed the ceremony, and when Graham said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I promise to love you and honor you all the days of my life. I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes. I promise to build a home with you where we can raise our children in safety and love. I promise to never let you scrub another floor in frozen water." That last line made everyone laugh, even though most people did not know the full story behind it. Penelope said her own vows through happy tears, promising to be his partner and helpmeet, to support his dreams, to create a life together that honored the love they shared. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and invited Graham to kiss his bride, the room erupted in cheers. Graham pulled Penelope close and kissed her deeply, and she felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was where she belonged. This was home. The reception that followed was joyous and lasted late into the evening. People ate and drank, and danced to music provided by a fiddler and a guitar player from one of the local saloons. Graham and Penelope danced together, and though neither of them was particularly skilled, they moved together with an ease that came from understanding each other so well. "I cannot believe we are married," Penelope whispered as Graham spun her around the floor. "Believe it," he replied, grinning. "You are stuck with me now, Mrs. Brennan." "Penelope Brennan," she said, testing out her new name. "I like the sound of that. So do I." They honeymooned by closing the hotel for a week and spending time at a small cabin Graham owned in the mountains above White Oaks. It was primitive but comfortable, and they spent their days hiking and fishing and talking about everything and nothing. At night, they lay together under heavy quilts, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal reverence. For Penelope, who had known so little tenderness in her life, Graham's gentle passion was a revelation. He made her feel cherished and desired and safe, and she gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. When they returned to White Oaks, they threw themselves back into work with renewed energy. The business continued to thrive, and they began making plans for expansion. Graham purchased land outside of town and hired men to help him start building a ranch. The idea was to have both businesses running simultaneously, the hotel providing steady income while the ranch grew into profitability. It was ambitious, but with Penelope managing the hotel and Graham overseeing the ranch, they made it work. Their first child, a son, was born in March of 1884, during a late winter storm that dumped 2 feet of snow on White Oaks. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Penelope was afraid she would not survive it. But Graham stayed with her throughout, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and when their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Penelope looked up at her husband's tear-streaked face and felt a love so profound it almost hurt. They named him Henry, after Graham's father, and he was healthy and strong from the start. Graham was a devoted father, involved in every aspect of Henry's care in a way that was unusual for men of that era. He changed diapers and walked the floor with his son during colicky nights and sang lullabies in a surprisingly good baritone. Watching him with their child, Penelope fell in love with him all over again. Their second child, a daughter named Caroline, came 18 months later, and then another daughter, Lucy, 2 years after that. Each birth was easier than the last, and each child brought new joy to their lives. The hotel continued to operate successfully, though Penelope gradually stepped back from day-to-day management as her family grew, training staff to handle most operations while she focused on the children and helped Graham with ranch business. The ranch itself became Graham's pride and joy. He built a fine house there, larger than the rooms above the hotel, with space for their growing family. They moved there when Henry was 4, though they kept the hotel running under capable management. The house was built of adobe in the local style, with thick walls that kept it cool in summer and warm in winter. It had a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains, and a large kitchen where the whole family gathered for meals. By 1890, the Brennan Ranch was one of the most successful in the territory, and the Brennan Hotel remained the best lodging in White Oaks. Graham and Penelope had built something substantial and lasting, exactly as Graham had envisioned that day when he had first walked into the Silver Dollar Saloon and seen a desperate woman scrubbing floors. They had 3 healthy children, with a 4th on the way. They had financial security, community respect, and most importantly, they had each other. Sometimes on quiet evenings, after the children were asleep and the ranch was settled for the night, Graham and Penelope would sit together on their porch and talk about the journey that had brought them to this place. Penelope would look at the ring on her finger, tarnished now with years of wear but still beautiful, and remember the moment Graham had slipped it on her hand by the river in Lincoln. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him one such evening. "Buying that saloon instead of one of the other properties you were considering. Everything might have turned out differently." Graham pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders. "I do not believe in regrets. Every choice we made, every step we took led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Even on days when the cattle break through the fence and the kids are fighting and the cook at the hotel sends word that the stove is broken again. Even then," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Especially then. Because it is our life, the one we built together. That makes every challenge worth facing." Penelope rested her head on his shoulder, content. "I love you, Graham Brennan. I love you too, Penelope Brennan. From the moment I saw you scrubbing those floors, through every day since, until the end of my days." Their 4th child, another son they named Robert, was born in August of 1890. 2 years later, their last child, a daughter named Grace after Graham's youngest sister, made her appearance. 5 children in 8 years was a full house, but Penelope loved the noise and chaos and constant activity. She loved watching her children grow, seeing traces of both her and Graham in their faces and personalities. Henry had his father's steadiness and sense of responsibility. Caroline had her mother's head for numbers. Lucy was fearless and adventurous. Robert was gentle and artistic. Baby Grace was still too young to show much personality, but she had her father's gray-green eyes and her mother's determination. The children grew up knowing they were loved and secure, never doubting that they had a place in the world. Graham made sure they understood the value of hard work, having them help with ranch chores appropriate to their ages, but he also made sure they had time to play and be children. Penelope taught them reading and arithmetic, instilling in them the importance of education. Together, they created the kind of home both of them had dreamed of, full of laughter and love and hope. As New Mexico territory moved toward statehood, the Brennan family grew in prominence. Graham was asked to serve on various civic committees, and Penelope became known for her charitable work, never forgetting what it was like to be desperate and alone. They donated money to build a school in White Oaks and helped establish a fund to assist widows and orphans. When people asked why they were so generous, Penelope would simply say that they were paying forward the kindness that had been shown to them. The years passed in the way years do, marked by the milestones of family life. Henry's first horse, Caroline's talent for music, Lucy's scrapes and bruises from climbing trees, Robert's beautiful drawings, Grace's first steps, Birthdays and holidays and ordinary days that accumulated into a life well lived. Through it all, Graham and Penelope remained devoted to each other, their love deepening and maturing as they faced life's joys and sorrows together. There were hard times, of course. A drought in 1893 that killed half their cattle. A bout of scarlet fever that swept through the town and terrified them for weeks until they knew their children would all recover. The death of Graham's sister Emma from complications in childbirth, which hit him hard and made him retreat into himself for a time until Penelope pulled him back. But they weathered every storm together, their partnership strong enough to handle whatever came their way. By 1900, as the new century dawned, White Oaks was changing. The mines were beginning to play out, and many people were moving away to find opportunities elsewhere. But the Brennan Ranch remained strong, and the hotel, though less busy than in boom times, still provided steady income. Henry, now 16, was already talking about expanding their cattle operation. Caroline, 14, helped her mother manage the hotel's books. Lucy, 12, could ride and rope as well as any boy her age. Robert, 10, filled sketchbooks with drawings of the landscape he loved. Grace, 8, was the baby of the family but already showing signs of the strong she had inherited from both parents. One evening in the spring of that year, Graham and Penelope took a rare trip together without the children, leaving them in the capable care of Mrs. Chen, who had become a close family friend over the years. They rode out to the spot where Graham had first proposed, by the river in Lincoln, and sat together watching the water flow past. 18 years, Penelope said wonderingly. 18 years since you walked into that saloon and changed my life. 18 years since I found the other half of my soul, Graham corrected, though I did not know it at the time. Did you really fall in love with me that first day, when I was on my knees scrubbing floors, half frozen and completely desperate? Graham considered the question seriously. I do not know if it was love right away, but it was something. A recognition maybe, like my heart knew you before my head caught up, and every day since has proven that initial instinct right. Penelope turned to look at him, this man who had given her everything. He was older now, silver threading through his dark hair, lines deeper around his eyes. But he was still strong, still capable, still the steadiest person she knew. I still cannot believe sometimes that this is my life, that I went from scrubbing floors in frozen water to this, a husband I adore. 5 beautiful children, a home and a business and security. It feels too good to be real. It is real because we made it real. We worked for it, fought for it, built it together piece by piece. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her ring the way he had done 1,000 times over the years. And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still, and I plan to spend every one of them loving you. I love you too, so much, more than I could ever put into words. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The river flowed on, constant and unchanging, while their lives flowed forward into whatever future awaited. But whatever came, they would face it together, just as they always had. The children grew and eventually began lives of their own. Henry took over management of the ranch when Graham decided to step back in 1910, at the age of 53. He ran it with the same integrity and vision his father had shown, eventually marrying a girl from Las Cruces and giving Graham and Penelope their first grandchildren. Caroline married a lawyer and moved to Santa Fe but visited often, bringing her own children to run wild on the ranch where she had grown up. Lucy, true to her adventurous nature, married a surveyor and traveled with him throughout the Southwest, writing long letters home about her adventures. Robert became an artist of some renown, his paintings of New Mexico landscapes sought after by collectors. Grace, the baby, became a teacher like her Aunt Sarah, opening a school for girls in White Oaks that operated for many years. Through all the changes and passages, Graham and Penelope remained the center around which the family revolved. Their love was the foundation on which everything else was built, and their children and grandchildren grew up understanding that true partnership looked like. They celebrated their 25th anniversary in 1909 with all 5 children and their families present, a house full of people and noise and joy. They celebrated their 30th in 1914 and their 35th in 1919, each milestone a testament to the strength of their bond. In 1920, as America was changing rapidly, Graham and Penelope took a trip back to White Oaks to visit the hotel, which was still operating though the town itself was much quieter than in the boom days. The building had been well maintained over the years, and it still bore the name Brennan Hotel and Restaurant, though they had long since sold their interest to the manager who ran it. They walked through the rooms together, remembering the dining room where they had been married, the small office where they had fallen in love over ledger books and inventory lists, the upstairs room where Penelope had spent her first night sleeping in a real bed after months in a closet. And finally, they walked into the main bedroom, now brightly lit and cheerful, barely recognizable as the dark saloon it had once been. "Right there," Penelope said, pointing to a spot near the back. "That is where I was scrubbing the floor that morning. The water was so cold and I was so miserable. I thought that was all life would ever be, just endless cold and work and loneliness." Graham slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. And then a foolish cowboy walked in and fell in love at first sight, though he was too stubborn to admit it. "Not so foolish after all," Penelope said, looking up at him. "You saw something in me that no one else did. You gave me warmth when I was cold, work that mattered when I had nothing, and a ring when I thought I would always be alone. You gave me everything. You gave me everything too, a purpose, a partner, a family, a reason to build something lasting." He kissed her forehead gently. "Best decision I ever made, walking through that door." They stood together for a long moment, remembering that cold December morning that had changed both their lives. Then they walked out together into the warm June sunshine, hand in hand as they had been for almost 40 years, heading home to the ranch and the life they had built together. Graham and Penelope lived to see New Mexico achieve statehood in 1912, lived to see automobiles replace horses on many roads, lived to see the world change in ways they could never have imagined when they were young. But through all the changes, their love remained constant, a fixed point in a turning world. Graham died peacefully in 1932 at the age of 75, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, with Penelope holding his hand. His last words were to tell her he loved her, and that he would wait for her on the other side. Penelope lived another 8 years, cared for by her children in the house Graham had built for their family. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, telling stories to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the old days, about scrubbing floors in frozen water and the cowboy who had saved her. She died in her sleep in 1940 at the age of 77, and her last conscious thought was of Graham, waiting for her as he had promised. They were buried together on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a shared headstone that read simply Graham and Penelope Brennan, partners in life and love, together always. The ranch continued under Henry's management and eventually passed to his children. The hotel in White Oaks eventually closed as the town faded, but the building still stood, a monument to what 2 determined people could build together. and the story of the woman scrubbing floors in frozen water, and the cowboy who gave her warmer work, and a ring became family legend, passed down through generations, as an example of how love could transform lives and how kindness could echo through time. Their 5 children, 17 grandchildren, and 43 great-grandchildren carried forward the legacy Graham and Penelope had created, living lives marked by the same integrity, determination, and love that had characterized their grandparents' partnership. The Brennan name became synonymous with honesty and community service in New Mexico. And though the specific details of Graham and Penelope's first meeting might have been softened or dramatized over the years, the essential truth remained. Sometimes love finds us in the darkest moments, in the coldest water, when we are on our knees and have nothing left. Sometimes a stranger walks through a door and sees not what we are, but what we could be. Sometimes warmer work is just the beginning. Sometimes a ring is a promise kept across a lifetime. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, we find someone who will stand beside us through every season, building a life and a love that lasts not just for years, but for generations, rippling forward through time like waves on a river, endlessly flowing, endlessly renewing, endlessly strong. That was the legacy of Graham and Penelope Brennan, and it was enough.